Hello everyone and welcome. I'm going to talk today about the plants of Cotopaxi and Chimborazo. They are perhaps two of the best known volcanoes in Ecuador, lying in the Valley of Volcanoes, which runs south from the capital city Quito. Although these two volcanoes, which you see in red on the screen, lie only about 50 kilometers apart, there's a marked difference in the number of alpine plants you find on them. Volcan Cotopaxi has far fewer species than Chimborazo, and that's because Cotopaxi is a very active stratovolcano. It last erupted in 2015, so its upper slopes are covered in recent layers of volcanic ash and lava. On the other hand, Chimborazo is classified as dormant, and that last erupted about 1400 years ago. So of course soils have been able to form and mature, and plants have had a much longer time to develop without interruption. But on both volcanoes it's necessary to climb high to reach the alpine zone. At altitudes of below 3,700 meters, the flora is largely tropical or subtropical, and then you get beautiful plants like these passion flowers and this fuchsia. But we're going to return to the high Andean moorland on the lower slopes of Volcan Chimborazo. Now at 3,700 meters or thereabouts, the dominant vegetation becomes paramo. That's the high Andean moorland. It lies between the tree line and the permanent snow line, and it's composed of tropical montane vegetation. And the paramo really forms a complete alpine tundra ecosystem, in which the iconic plant is the giant rosette plant. In this area, plants like Espalicia pycnophila growing in the paramo. It's a high altitude flora. It only grows at altitudes in excess of 4,000 meters or thereabouts, and it grows amongst sort of the grasses and the low shrubs that make up this ecosystem. Now, at the equator, of course, day length remains more or less constant throughout the year, and so you can find flowers throughout the year. But on the other hand, there are seasonal patterns to the rainfall, and that, of course, influences growth. Generally speaking, there's a rainy season from October to May, and many plants flower towards the end of the rainy season. This means that the end of March or the beginning of April is actually quite a good time to go to see them. Now, if we go back to Volcan Cotopaxi, here we are looking at plants below, of course, the snow line, and in the area roundabout where you can see there's a orange or red-topped building. That is the mountain refuge on the slopes, and it's in the center of the volcano as you look at this picture. And around there we found plants like this, both members of the Asteraceae, the Baccharis cespitosa and Pentecalia chimborensis. The Baccharis is a low-growing shrub, as is the Pentecalia. They're both woody, and they both have very small flowers, one white, of course, and the other yellow. We also found Werneria pumila. This likes dampish areas where there's a bit of moisture, small bogs, still though on the side of the volcano. And it also likes to grow in areas where it's not shaded by other rocks, but is in the open, in full sun. The flowers are sessile, and it's low growing, only about 2 centimeters high. We found a really neat member of the Brassicaceae though, and that was this little Draba depressor, making little rosettes of leaves. They're covered in white woolly hairs, and in the center you've got little yellow 4-petal flowers, and the calyces again are hairy. And pubescence is a method by which plants in these high altitude regions protect themselves from the harsh extremes of the climate, because the white woolly hairs prevent the leaves from losing too much moisture through transpiration, And they also protect the plant against the high UV radiation which you get at these altitudes. Now, Gentiana sedifolia is a small, short-lived herb, often annual. The flowers only open when the sun shines, so they close at night and they close when it's cold and cloudy. And this likes moisture, so it grows where there's some little sort of swampy areas or bogs in the Puna and Paramo. It grows, you find it all the way from northern Chile up to Costa Rica. And there was also a little gentianella growing there. It was an unidentified species with purple petals, as so often the gentians in this area are, and nicely veined with deeper purple veins. Two more members of the Asteraceae were these Hypercharis. Hypercharis sessiliflora is a smallish herb, again quite low growing. The flowers are usually yellow. They may be white on occasion, and very rarely they could be orange or even purple. Hypercharis sonchoides normally has white flowers. But now we're going to move on to Chimborazo, and on the way there along the roadside you pass by cliffs that have been formed from volcanic eruptions, so you've got layers of ash. They're multicolored because, of course, the layers of ash may contain different minerals depending partly from which volcano they came and also the time at which they erupted, and the minerals that were contained in the ash as it spewed out of the volcano. But now we've reached Volcan Chimborazo. This has an altitude of 6,263 meters above sea level. That's over 20,000 feet. But the local people will tell you that Volcan Chimborazo is the highest mountain on Earth. It isn't, of course. Mount Everest is, and that rises to well over 8,000 meters. But the local people do have a point, because, of course, the Earth is not completely spherical. It has a bulge around the equator. This means that if you measure the distance of the peak of Chimborazo from the center of the Earth, then indeed it is further from its summit to the center of the Earth than the summit of Mount Everest is to the center of the Earth. So that's how, of course, it gets this reputation of being the highest mountain on Earth. You can see in the foreground, though, there are three windswept-looking plants with rather striking silvery foliage. This is Senecio niveo aureus in the Asteraceae, and it has, of course, silver leaves, made silver because they're covered in indumentum, white sort of soft indumentum, again a mechanism by which the plant stops the leaves from losing too much moisture through transpiration. It likes to grow in full sun when the sun actually shines. You can see from the photos that's not on every day by a long chalk, and it is actually fully hardy. Another plant, though, which is silver, is one of the lichens that grows on Chimborazo. You can see that it covers quite a wide area on these upper slopes and has very dainty sort of filigree-like foliage. We also found a couple of rather attractive geraniums. Geranium sessiliflorum is quite widespread. It occurs in Chile, and in fact there's a subspecies in New Zealand. And this makes prostrate mats with crenate leaves and purplish pink flowers. By contrast, though, Geranium ecuadoriense is restricted to a very small area around Volcan Chimborazo, and this likes to grow on the very sandy or gravelly soils that you find on the volcano. It makes a little cushion plant with deeply divided bluish-green leaves. The flowers vary from white to pinkish purple and are veined with purple again. And it's a very high altitude plant growing at about 4,000 meters. There were more gentians up there, though. There's little Gentianella cerastioides, var chimborensis, and this makes small tufts with purplish violet flowers. You can see on the left that the flowers may be white in the center, but backs of the petals are certainly violet, and the one on the right was flushed violet on the upper surfaces too. You do get some wildlife up here, and these are members of the camel family. They're one of two naturally wild species in South America. This is the vicuña. You also have guanacos, which occur further south in Argentina and Chile, in Patagonia. They are, of course, related to llamas and also to alpacas. Alpacas are really very domesticated breeds, probably descended from vicuñas, and both vicuñas and alpacas are prized for their very fine hair, which is spun and woven and used to make sweaters. They are, of course, though, camels, and like all members of the camel family, they bite, they spit, they smell, and they run very fast. We also found on Chimborazo a nototrichis. I mean, this is a plant that is much prized by alpine enthusiasts. It's in the mallow family. It only grows above 4,000 meters, and it makes a low-growing, cushion-forming perennial, and it inhabits this very loose volcanic detritus on the bleak scree slopes. The petals, as you can see, are this wonderful deep purplish blue. They're very showy, and actually locally it's quite common. Now, nototrichis are very difficult, I think, to grow in cultivation, and perhaps you've already gained an idea of the habitat in which they grow means that they need an extremely well-drained soil and a very drafty, windswept position. Cuttings are said, though, to root easily, but the plants are susceptible to botrytis, particularly in our damp and muggy winters, or, of course, if they're overwatered. And I can testify to the fact that slugs regard them as caviar. A dainty little rosette plant that we found was a member of the Brassicaceae, Eudemon nubigena. This is only found in these rocky areas like the slopes of the volcano, and it's actually threatened by habitat loss. In making rosettes of leaves, as it does, this again, of course, is a means by which the plant protects its flowers, which are clustered in the center, and then later its seeds. But another rosette plant that we were really excited to find was a viola. This is one of the Andean violas that are popularly called rosulate because the leaves form a rosette. And we found three different forms. Now, the one on the right you could see easily has pale lemon yellow flowers. In fact, it's got some seed pods as well. Then we found a silver-leaved form, but you may be slightly puzzled by the form in the top left picture. You will see that there is a lower petal that is very pale yellow on the bottom rosette and the one on the top rosette of that plant. But you have to look quite hard to see the upper petals. They are there, but they are the same color as the volcanic rock around. They're almost a sort of charcoal gray, a slight tinge of brown even to them. But they have got their full complement of petals, and that, of course, was quite an exciting find, to find a bicolored form as well as the yellow one. Now, we also found these 5 plants on Volcan Chimborazo, but because we found them on Cotopaxi, and I've already talked about them when we talked about the plants of Volcan Cotopaxi, I'm just showing you them again, but I'm not going to obviously go into any more detail. We found another viola as we descended the slopes. This was Viola bangii. Comes from not only Ecuador, but extends into Bolivia. And it's a semi sort of rosulate viola, if you like, but a very pretty one with these white flowers and deep purple veins on the petals. And you can see there's a little senecio that's crept into the center of the photograph as well. Then as we got down to the lower slopes and back down to the road, we found plants like the bidens, Bidens humilis. Now, there are species of bidens in cultivation in the UK. They've become very popular as bedding plants for containers and hanging baskets. And we also found an unusual member of the gentian family. That was Helenia wedeliana. And it makes a plant about 60 to 90 centimeters in height with yellowish green reflexed petals. It's quite an unusual gentian. There was also a little member of the pea family, a little astragalus with pinnate leaves and two-toned bicolored flowers. And then in the damp spots we found Werneria nubigena, but this was a pink flowered form, or at least it was going to be when it opened its bud properly. And you can see again, like the one I showed you earlier, that it's got these fan-shaped leaves which make it so distinctive. But we've now reached the end of the talk. Volcan Chimborazo is still in the mist, but around the base again we found more bidens, and I was quite surprised to come across one of the paintbrushes, Castilea arvensis. This is actually an annual paintbrush, and of course you can see the flowers have red tip bracts, and it's hemiparasitic. It's found not only in this part of South America, but in Central South America and even as far north as Mexico. Well, I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the plants on these two very famous volcanoes. Thank you for listening.